How can Joe Biden be so far ahead of Donald Trump if swing voters favor the president? I'm Michael Smerconish in Philadelphia. Consider the following. There is a mountain of polling data that suggests that if the election were held today, Joe Biden would be elected the nation's 46th president, and probably by a landslide. Take your pick. The latest Ipsos Reuters poll of registered voters has Biden up by 9 percentage points. CBS YouGov poll of likely voters, Biden by 10. The Fox News poll of registered voters, Biden by 8. The Real Clear Politics average has Biden ahead by 8 percentage points. And with regard to the all-important battleground states, here are some of the latest results. A Franklin and Marshall College poll of Pennsylvania voters has Biden up by 9. A New York Times Siena poll of Wisconsin voters, Biden by 11. And in 3 other swing states, a CNN SSRS poll tells the same story. Biden leads Trump by 4 in Arizona, 5 in Florida, 12 points in Michigan. So you might be thinking that means swing voters decidedly favor Joe Biden. But that may not be true, at least according to data from a firm that for more than a year has conducted 17 focus groups with swing voters in 7 swing states. That nonpartisan firm is called Engageus. They've assembled small groups of swing voters in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Iowa, Minnesota, and Florida. These swing voters are people who voted for Romney in 2012, then Clinton in 2016, or they voted for Obama in 2012 and then Trump in 2016. Focus groups don't yield quantitative data, but they do generate significant qualitative information. They're often seen as early detection systems of shifting public opinions that polls can be slower to capture. And in all but one of these focus groups, one in Erie, Pennsylvania, the swing voters said they are favoring Donald Trump. For example, last week in Macomb County, Michigan, swing voters told Engageus they had questions about Joe Biden.
I don't think that Biden is going to be running our country. Whoever his vice president is going to be running the country. The vice president or whoever, the puppet people are, telling him what to say.
He just never has his own ideas. He doesn't have his own ideas.
I think Biden wouldn't really be the person controlling the country, whereas Trump I believe is actually the person actually running the country.
Biden has been in there forever, 50 years in politics and doing all this stuff, and he's never done anything.
So how can both of these things be true, that Biden is winning the race handily, but swing voters favor Donald Trump?
Well, I've been to those 7 states that you mentioned over the last 17 months, and the bottom line is that the old quote from Margaret Thatcher, first you win the argument, then you win the vote. Well, right now, Donald Trump is winning the argument with 2/3 of the people that I'm talking to. And I think from a perspective of the people who will determine or could determine the outcome of this election, that the energy is still with President Trump.
Rich, if you had found that in half the focus groups, I don't think you'd be booked on the program today. It's the fact that you tell me 16 of the 17 have reached a similar consensus. What was different about Erie, Pennsylvania?
Well, what was different is that Erie was done in June. And right after we had all the social unrest, and there was still a fit of pique that a lot of people felt, and I think they were still sorting out their emotions. And at that point, some of them were more frustrated with President Trump than they typically would be. But this past month in Macomb County, it reverted to form, and 7 of the 9 people in a choice between Trump and Biden would take Trump.
Is there selection bias in the way that you're going about this?
I don't think there's selection bias. And in fact, the professor had conducted research that I recently came across, which basically validated in quant form what I found qualitatively, which is that roughly 2/3 of the Obama-Trump voters, when given the choice between Trump and Biden, would take President Trump, and 1/3 would take Biden. And this is very, very consistent across the country, again, with that one exception last month or in June in Erie.
Dr. Bidikofer, can both things be true? That Rich's data is accurate, and yet that Joe Biden is handily ahead?
Yeah, this is fascinating data to hear. I get a little preview for the show, so this is the first that I'm hearing about the dates and the hearing that there's a focus group in June that that swung the other way, and that he's seeing a reversion to the mean in the new data. I mean, I'm just dying to hear what the new focus group data will show. And I've been arguing, look, I just put out an article in Market Watch, and I'm talking about how my forecasting model is based on something called negative partisanship, and how it has guaranteed basically like a 4-point advantage for the Democrats, and now that nominee is Biden, coming into this presidential election based on awoken demographic giants that didn't flex its muscle in 2018, and that's Democrats, but it's also independents that lean left, okay? And so these focus groups, like, to me, the 2/3, 1/3 is there's this 2/3 that are right-leaning independents, and now what we've seen with the pandemic mismanagement is erosion of right-leaning independents who have hung with Trump through all of these things that have happened in the last 4 years. The last time they broke with him was when the Access Hollywood video was released before the election, and then they broke with him and then returned for the election, and they've stuck with him through it all until this pandemic mismanagement. And the quant data is still showing that they are swinging away, at least in the generic or on the head-to-head ballot stuff. So it'll be interesting to see if you're right in this, and the qualitative data is a leading indicator. Then what we will expect to see is this expected re-narrowing of that head-to-head ballot as these right-leaning indies begin to return. Now, the one thing I will say is usually a stimulus happens and it disappears. The pandemic is not something that's disappearing. It's becoming, it's pretty stable in its severity, and probably going to become worse as we head through the fall. So that's one thing that I think is a little bit different.
Rachel, is it possible that the way to read your conclusions and Rich's conclusions together and not being at odds? I know from our prior conversations and my reading of your work that you are very big on turnout, not swing voters. Is it that Rich's analysis doesn't take into full consideration the passion that exists among anti-Trump voters? Pew Research, for example, said 2/3 of those who are for Joe Biden are for Joe Biden because they want to get rid of Donald Trump.
Right. Which is exactly my model, right? No, I mean, I don't think Rich, I just think Rich is in a different research area, right? I mean, he's talking about, he's really trying to delve qualitatively into what, swing voters, Rich is discounting, not in a pejoratively way, but he's not focused on this new model that I'm advocating for that argues, look, it's the ultimate partisan, including independent leaners, partisan composition of the electorate, and the pure indies are going to break heavily against the Republicans in this cycle. So I don't know that he's advocating that Trump is going to win the election. I would, if that's the case, then I would strongly disagree. I don't think there's any signs in the election data right now that are positive for Trump. But I do think, and I think other analysts have been arguing this, that these large leads that we're seeing for Biden now may not hold, and that's why I've said, on my an election analysis, that it would be probably folly to completely go all in on the idea that you can win over these Trump voters and ignore the other part of your electoral strategy, because that's what the Clinton campaign did too. They were thinking, oh, these Trump, leaning independents will break, and then they ended up, leaving them at the altar. So it really is, I think, a risky strategy.
Rich, one final note. I just want to make this clear. You did 15 of these focus groups with swing voters in swing states. They pretty much told you the same thing. Number 16, you get to Erie, and there's a reversal. And it makes you think, hey, maybe the pandemic has caught up to Donald Trump. But let's underscore this. Number 17, which you just did, was Macomb County, Michigan, home of the famous Democrats for Reagan. And there'd been a reversal back to what you'd been getting previously. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. And I just want to stress, I am not saying that Trump is going to win the election, and I am not saying that Biden is going to win the election. What I'm saying is that we have to have tremendous amounts of humility after what happened in 2016 and know that there are so many outside events. Will people be comfortable voting during a pandemic in person? What outside events that we can't foresee will happen between now and November 3rd. So those are the things that I have in my mind as I think about projections about what's going to happen. We just have to be really, really humble.